Hi everyone, welcome to THT, and today we are reviewing more spoilers from Shadow of the Galaxy. First card for today is Pike Sentinel, which is going to be the cheapest Sentinel in the entire game. There's currently no Sentinel that costs less than 3, and this by itself makes the card very interesting and potentially very good, because here goes, your opponent attacks you, and you want something cheap that can block it. You can play Pike Sentinel, as we call a chump blocker, like a unit that's simply going to block and die right away. Right now, the only other leaders that can do that is Chewbacca, but now having access to a cheap Sentinel that will deal some damage back on units, I think is going to be quite valuable. Will it see play though? Is difficult to say. One of the problems with this card is the stat line. There's a 2-3. 2-3 in the current meta at least is very poorly positioned, because most of the turn 1 play that we are seeing are usually going to be 3-3 with the Battlefield Marine or the Sabine that can one-shot this guy without dying, and that's a bit of a problem. So we'll see how much it end up seeing play, but I think the card has a decent amount of potential, and this is why I rank it with a 7 out of 10. Moving on to Dr. Iasan. This card, in my opinion, is the strongest card that we have seen from Shadow of the Galaxy so far. Having a unit that is 3-3 shielded for 2 is simply just incredibly powerful. You think about it, right? Battlefield Marine, I already rate Battlefield Marine as being one of the best cards in the game, and a card that I was rating S tier in my ultimate Spark of Rebellion tier list. This unit is a 3-3 and shielded, it makes such a huge difference. Obviously, it has a downside, the bounty that allows you to ready up to 12 resources, but the more I think about it, the less I think this bounty is going to be a big deal. Because here's the thing. I think the global strategy with that card is that you're going to be playing it on turn 1, and then you're never gonna attack other units. You're simply just gonna attack base. You're gonna attack base over and over and over again. And if your opponent wants to kill that thing, either he's gonna need some very specific tools that allows him to do so, like for example a Power of the Dark Side, assuming there's no other unit to sacrifice, or a takedown, or something along those lines. And those very specific tools are only available in a very specific color combination, which is blue-black. I mean, blue decks will also have the options, but generally speaking, this card is going to be an absolute pain to get rid of for decks that are not blue. And if you're playing a blue deck, and yeah, you can play removal, and then you get to ready your resource right away, it's kind of nice. But at the end of the day, you still spent like an entire card to deal with this guy, and by the time you get to those expensive removal, Dr. Iasan has already had time to deal tons of damage to you. So that's really the thing about this card, is that I think this card is incredibly powerful against anything that is not blue. If you're not playing blue, good luck getting rid of that card. It's going to be very difficult. Because here's the thing. You can decide to attack it, okay? To take off his shield. And then what your opponent can do is, like, you can decide to attack, to sacrifice it, to basically, okay, you attack my doctor, you remove the shield. Now I'm going to attack into one of your units, and my doctor is going to die, and because you decide, and you're not going to ready any resources. So if the Dr. Iasan has no shield, then all you got to do is have the initiative, and you can just attack into something, and he dies right away. And there's plenty of ways to play around the fact that to time things correctly to make it so your opponent does not ready any resources. So obviously I have not played with the card. This is only my first impression, but in theory, there's a lot of ways to play around in order to never have to really suffer from the real downside. So obviously it's going to force you to take some line of plays that are not exactly the most optimal, maybe. So my opinion about the card is, like, this card is incredibly powerful against anything that is not blue, especially blue-black. So if you're playing blue, or if you're playing blue-black and you got specific tools to deal with it, I think this card is not that big of an issue. But in other matchups, I think this card is incredible. So we'll see how it ends up going out. Obviously, another very important factor is that one of the big weaknesses of Boba so far was that Boba didn't have really the best turn 1 plays. But with this card, it really perfectly completes the Boba package here, with it looks to be it looks to me to be one of the best two drop in the game, if not the best two drop in the game. Full stop. I think this card really has the potential to be the best two drop in the game. So obviously we don't know the entire card pool. We've seen a lot of cards that counters bounty. So maybe if this card starts to become super meta, people are going to be bringing anti-bounty tech in order to deal with that boy. And we've already seen a couple of cards that basically play against bounty in this set. So we'll see how it all shapes out. But I think it's fair to say that this card is, in my opinion, is the strongest card we've seen so far. And to me, it is one of the best it's going to be one of the best to drop in the game. I think against anything that is not blue, this card is incredible. So for me, I rate this a 9 out of 10. If it didn't have this just a blatant like weakness versus blue, I would have rated this a 10 out of 10. But so far, it's only a 9 out of 10. Next, we got Follower of the Way. So Follow the Way is not super exciting because the thing is, obviously, it's a card that needs another card in order to be good, and even if it gets that other card, it's not that impressive. Like, let's say you get upgraded, then you end up with a 2/4 for 2 that is conditional, requiring other upgrades to come out. A 2/4 for 2 is not really that amazing, guys. Like, Crafty Smuggler, for example, a 2/2 shielded, is very close to a 2/4 for 2. Like, but it's unconditional. So even though the upgraded, so it is conditional, the upgraded bonus is not that great. And yeah, it's conditional, and it requires multiple. You need to play the card, then your opponent needs to not attack into it, and then you need to play an upgrade. So the sequencing is also problematic. If we see a lot of like zero cost upgrades, I can see this card being a lot more playable. So we'll see. It has maybe a little bit of potential for this. Honestly, I rated a 3 out of 10. Honestly, it's generous. I think I should have rated this a 2 out of 10, to be honest. The more I think about it. It has the Mandalorian type, which is relevant, and I'm sure there's going to be tons of upgrades in this meta. So maybe it's going to see play because it fits perfectly into the Mandalorian upgrade deck that FFG seems to be want us to build. But I'm not very excited about this card, and I don't think it's going to be competitive. Then we got IG-11. So IG-11 has multiple problems. So the first one is that it is quite slow. A 5 cost unit that doesn't have an immediate impact on the game. And unless you are playing it with Energy Conversion Lab. But I don't think this card is an amazing Energy Conversion Lab target. It's like, as I said, the 7 attack to really one-shot leaders is really what makes Steadfast Battalion a great target for ECL. IG-11 only has 6 attack. Yes, he has his own attack, deal 3 damage to a damaged ground unit, but a damaged ground unit, that's a very steep condition to meet. So the ability is very conditional, so no immediate impact on the game, ability that is quite conditional, and the capture ability is basically just a thematic thing. I don't think this is going to have any impact on how playable the card is. So I'm not super excited about this card. I don't think it's unplayable. But for me, I rated a 4 out of 10, and maybe it's a little bit generous. Maybe I should have rated a 3 out of 10. I think maybe the only reason I rated 4 is because of the fact that some situations can be very strong with ECL. But yeah. Moving on, we got Spare the Target. So Spare the Target is basically a waylay but it has a couple of differences. The first differences is that you cannot use Spare the Target on your own unit. As opposed to waylay, you can waylay your own unit. In which case is it relevant? Me, I personally use waylay on my own unit when I want to push some extra damage to finish off an opponent. So for example, I had a Falcon in play, I attack with that Falcon, I waylay my own Falcon, replay the Falcon, then attack Falcon to deal 3 more damage. It's kind of like having an extra copy of Falcon. So I use it not very often, but it's something that I do every once in a while. There's a couple of cases where bouncing your own unit can be relevant, but overall I think that being able to collect the bounty is going to be more relevant, especially as we see super strong cards that have bounties like the Doctor. So you play this on Doctor, you basically get this card, this as a free, which is nice. It's not like amazing or anything like that. I still would far prefer playing a Power of the Dark Side on that 3/3 shielded unit, but to Spare the Target, I guess, is decent enough. I think the main advantage of this card is the fact that it is white, meaning that it does not disturb your 4 cards, I believe in. So now aggro decks that play 4 cards, I believe in, will be able to play that card without diminishing the impact of the 4 cards, I believe in. And I think this is a very big deal. And I think Waylay effect are definitely something that aggro deck would want to have. It's another argument. Yellow, white is really getting. Yellow Sabine is really getting a lot of interesting tools in this set to become a stronger deck. So definitely Spare the Target is definitely a card I would be closely looking into. I think in a lot of definitely I think in my hand deck, for example, I would definitely play this card over Waylay because I think collecting the bounty is going to be the unit's bounty is going to be more relevant than bouncing my own stuff like this. So overall, some give and takes. Obviously, Waylay has the advantage of being playable in villainy decks, and Waylay is also a trick. Winning it means that you can actually get it from Jabba the Hutt, stuff like this. So I think there's it's fair to say that that Waylay is not going to be replaced by this card, but for sure, Spare the Target is going to see some competitive play, and it's going to be 8 out of 10. I think Waylay is an excellent card in general, so just a card that is an upgrade to Waylay in some decks is going to be very, very playable. So for me, it's an 8 out of 10. Then we got our leaders. So this leader is interesting. It's basically has this. It's very conditional because you need to be first attack with the Mandalorian. So I'm talking about the leader side. You need to attack with a Mandalorian unit, and then you get a ping that is free. If you compare this to Vader's ping is less situational because all you need to do is play a black card, and it deals damage to a unit and a leader, but you have to pay 1 resources for it. Overall, I think the ability, the fact that it's a Mandalorian, you need to be attacking with a Mandalorian specifically, mean that this card, I think you're going to need to play a lot of Mandalorians in order to make the ability consistent enough. But if you can, I think the leader side is pretty decent. So now the unit side. The unit side is basically a 5/7 for 6 because it deals 1 damage to a unit regardless if there's a Mandalorian or not. But that damage can obviously be spread to another unit. You can of course take off a shield and then kill the unit to one-shot an Iden or something like this. And if you attack with another Mandalorian, you can deal damage to another unit as well, which is kind of nice. So how do I rate this card? It's really going to depend on how many strong Mandalorians. If you really manage to build like a very strong Mandalorian deck, I think and you manage to trigger the ability very consistently, it can be pretty strong. The other problem I have with this card, so the first problem I have is like it's very conditional. It's a strong deck building constraint to have to build only Mandalorian, and here's the payoff to have such a steep deck building constraint. Like for example, for Vader, the deck building constraint to play a lot of black cards in your deck is really not that big of a deal because there's tons of black cards and they're very strong. Mandalorian trait is a much more restrictive thing. So in my opinion, she has very strong deck building constraints, and the other problem that she has is that the payoff for playing a lot of Mandalorian is not super high. Like the payoffs that she gives you for playing Mandalorian, it's a ping, yeah, it's okay. So you have to measure is how big is the constraint and how big is the payoff. In this case, the constraint is very high, the payoff is not so high. So the last thing I don't like about this card is the fact that it is red-white. Obviously, it's a leader that is more like control-y, like dealing damage to enemy units to kill them. It's more of a control ability. So she's either going to be played in a sort of control or mid-range deck, and the idea of playing attacking with Mandalorian is more like and red-white is a very aggressive color at the moment. Maybe that's going to be different with Shadow of the Galaxy, but for now, red-white is very much a very aggro color. So there's kind of a disconnection between the leader's ability and what the color wants you to do, which is another thing I don't like. Overall, I rate it as a 5 out of 10. It's a very difficult to rate because it's obviously a leader that's going to depend a lot on what is available right now, what are the other, how strong are the Mandalorians, how many Mandalorians there is in the deck, in the set. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of them. How many of them are going to be good? So many questions that needs to be answered before knowing for sure how good this card is. But for now, my first impression is going to be a 5 out of 10. Next, we got First Light. So First Light has a lot of problems. First of all, it's very expensive, doesn't have an immediate impact on the game. That's kind of a problem. Something that costs 7 and doesn't have an immediate impact on the game, it really needs to be very, very strong to be good. and I don't think this card is in that department. I don't think this card is strong enough to justify such a high cost. Grit is not a very powerful keyword, in my opinion. It's a keyword that is very tricky because you deal damage to your unit to give it a better attack, yes, but at the meantime, by damaging your unit, you're also making it a lot more vulnerable to enemy removal, to enemy attacks. So it's very difficult to make that keyword work. Like very few units that have grit are actually good, and when they are good, it's usually not because of the grit. For example, I think Attack Pod, Guerrilla Attack Pod, has grit and it's a strong card, but I am pretty sure that if it didn't have grit, it would still like the fact that it is strong has nothing to do with the fact that it has grit. So yeah, having grit itself and giving grit to other units, not super relevant. The smuggle is interesting because it's pretty much the same cost as the unit itself. And then deal 4 damage to a friendly unit. Of course, the idea is you deal a damage to a unit, so this unit gets +4 attack bonus. It cannot damage itself. By the way, it was confirmed by the developers that it cannot damage itself. Yeah, so, but you need to have another friendly unit in play because this is part of the cost, right? So if you have no other unit, you can not smuggle that unit. Yeah, once again, yes, you're giving +4 attack to the unit, but you're also making that unit super vulnerable. It's very conditional because you need a unit that has at least 5 health on the battlefield for this to be able to be played, because it's part of the cost. If you cannot pay the cost, you can't play the card. So, yeah, simply a lot of things going on with this card, but in the end, not really much happening. Very expensive, no direct immediate impact on the game, and the ability is not even that powerful. So for me, it's a 3 out of 10. Then we got Gentle Giant. So Gentle Giant, once again, not much going on with this card. It's very big, but it has +1 attack. It has a grit. It has grit, and the ability is extremely situational because to make the ability work, you need the Gentle Giant to be damaged, and you also need another unit that you control that is damaged to actually be able to benefit from the ability. And since it's an on-attack trigger, you will actually heal, reducing the amount of damage that you're dealing with grit while attacking. So you might not even want to use the ability because it's going to reduce the amount of damage you're going to be dealing with Gentle Giant when he attacks. Obviously, two attack means that most people are simply just going to ignore it, and it's not going to have an amazing impact. 2-8 is the pretty terrible stat line. Right now we have a 2-8 for 4 with Jabba the Hutt, and Jabba as a 2-8 for 4 doesn't see any play. Like nobody plays Jabba the Hutt right now because 2-8 stat line is terrible. And Gentle Giant as a 6 is there's just simply this card is going to see any play in constructed. I just give it 1 point for the synergy with Protector. If you can play Protector on this card, it becomes a lot more interesting because then it becomes a 3-9. But I don't think it's going to be good enough for this card to see any play in Constructed. So, but I give it a point just for that synergy. Who knows? Maybe there's going to be plenty of other synergies with it. But this is currently my first impression, as usual. Pirate Battle Tank. So Pirate Battle Tank is interesting. Full 6 Sentinel full 6 is not terrible. It's basically an Obi-Wan. Obviously it doesn't have the when defeated Obi-Wan's ability, but it has Smuggle. And the Smuggle cost is only 1 more over the regular price. So I don't know if any deck will ever want to have that kind of effect, but I think it's a little bit similar to the other card. I forgot the name. There's another Sentinel unit, like the blue one, that goes into space that you can smuggle. It's basically the same idea, but on the ground, and has obviously better stats because ground units usually has better stats than space units. So I think this card has potential to be playable. I don't think it's very exciting. I don't know if green-black deck are going to need an effect like this. But if basically we're on a very grindy meta where Smuggle really becomes a thing, I think this is a strong Smuggle option. It's once again give you like an additional option. It's like if I need a Sentinel unit in some specific situation, I know I can smuggle that card from my resource and kind of block the space arena. And I think that option has potential. Then we got Clone Deserter, which is very similar to the 2/3 space that we saw earlier. I forgot the name once again, but it's 2/3 that for in space that draws you a card whenever it gets killed with a bounty, draw a card. This card is the same, but instead of being on space, it is on the ground, but it has Restore 1. Not gonna lie, Restore 1 is not really that big of a deal. I rated the other card a 6 out of 10. This one I'm rating it a 5 out of 10 because on the ground this card is going to be a lot more vulnerable. Therefore, collecting the bounty is going to be a lot easier for the opponent. So I don't think it's unplayable. I think there might be some decks that really want to swarm the board with multiple one-drop, puts a lot of stats on the battlefield. The Restore 1 is not super good, but it's not completely irrelevant. So I think this card has potential. That's why I rated it a 5 out of 10 for now. My first impression. Reputable Hunter. So this card is a 3/4, basically becomes a 3/4 for 2 if there's an enemy bounty. So obviously people play the Doctor, then you can play this for 2. Obviously that doesn't work if you have the initiative and you have to play this as your first card. So he has this kind of tricky part where you can play it on turn 1 if you don't have the initiative and your opponent plays exactly a bounty card, which is going to be pretty situational. You can also play the card Wanted for 0 on the opponent on turn 1 to make this card basically being a 3/4 for 2 right from turn 1, but once again there needs to be a unit on the board on the other side. 3/4 for 3 is not horrible, but it's not exactly amazing. I'm not super hyped about this card. I think it's going to be too situational, too tricky, and the payoff, it's going to be too situational to really work out the way people want it to work out. So I rated it a 5 out of 10. I think it's a little bit generous. Maybe it's a 4 out of 10. We'll see how it goes. But I'm not super excited for this card. Next we got Take Captive. Our friendly so here's the other allow you to capture a unit. So this card is very similar to Strike True in the sense that it's a 3 resources removal that requires you to already have a unit on the board to work. So the advantage of Strike True is that the unit is not captured, you deal damage to the unit, so you can eventually kill that unit forever. Strike True also the advantage of being able to hit both the space and the ground arena, while here it has to be a unit in the same arena, which is a big limitation. But the advantage of Take Captive is that the advantage of Take Captive is like it can capture and deal with a unit of any size, while Strike True is obviously going to be limited in terms of how much damage you're going to deal with it. So overall, I think this card is significantly worse than Strike True. I already think that Strike True is a very niche card, and I think Take Captive is overall a worse card than Strike True. Another factor that I wanted to take into account is that we've seen a lot of cards that are excellent versus capture unit. There's going to be another one in this video that I'm going to talk about, but we've already seen the one resource blue exhaust effect that you exhaust for 1, and then if that unit add a capture unit, you can free that unit. That is basically a hard counter to this card, and I'm expecting this card is going to see a lot of play simply because it's really good even without the anti-capture effect. So there's a lot of anti-capture effect in the game already that we've seen so far, which are just straight up just good cards by themselves. And I'm expecting we'll see a lot of play, and that's going to limit, and I think in my opinion for a capture card to be good, it's going to need to be super good. I get the idea of like, oh, this is not supposed to be permanent, just a temporary thing, but then like compare this to a Waylay. Waylay also deals temporarily with something, but at least it bounces back into his hand, while obviously when Techcap Captive is removed, the unit comes back into play. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of that card. I rated this as 3 out of 10. Maybe there's going to be some interesting synergies with capture and stuff that's going to make this good, but for now I'm not very excited about it. So Relentless Pursuit, another capture effect for 3 resources. This one I'm a little bit more optimistic about this one because first of all it doesn't have the same limitation. You can capture a unit on the ground or in space. And also the cool thing about it is that if the unit is a bounty hunter, you give it a shield. And that's a huge deal because you are protecting the unit that has captured the unit, making the unit that is shielded a lot more difficult to deal with, which means that the unit that is captured by that unit is going to be captured for a much longer amount of time. And I think that's a big deal. So The best way I see this card being played is, for example, in a Boba deck. The Boba himself is a bounty hunter, so you play Relentless Pursuit, you can basically get rid of a 5-drop, which is quite substantial, and then you give a shield to your Boba. Boba is already very difficult to deal with. A 7 else unit with a shield on it, it's going to be very hard to get rid of. So I think this card has potential to be played. I'm not rating it super high for the same reason as the previous capture card. I think capture effect have a problem in terms of like there seems to be a lot of very strong counter to captures in the set. But I think this card has a lot more potential. It's a more specialized, but in the right deck, I think it's substantially better. Then we got Kitso Ono. So pretty cool card. 3/2 Saboteur for 2 is not terrible. 3/2 stat line is a stat line that control decks I've preferred over aggro decks because this allows you to trade with Battlefield Marine or I forgot her name, or Sabine, and trade with those cards. And this one has Saboteur. I think this is a decent card in an aggro deck, but not only in an aggro deck. 3/2 for 2 Saboteur. We already have one card like this, and that's obviously the Wolf. Wolf obviously has the advantage of having this anti-heal effect, which overall is something that the aggro decks are looking for more than the ability to deal with upgrades. But we don't know. Maybe there's going to be some good upgrades to get rid of. You can get rid of an Entrench with this card, which is kind of neat. So obviously the playability of this card is going to depend a lot on is there a good upgrade to defeat. Another advantage that this card has over Wolfie is that it is heroism. It's not a rebel though, very big deal for a true drop, but it is heroism. So we'll see exactly how that works out on that front. But it has other very good keywords. It has Bounty Hunter and Mandalorian, which are two keywords that seem to be pretty relevant in the set. So we'll see how much it sees play, but I think the card is decent. I rated this a 6 out of 10. Next we got Knighhouse Skirmisher. And this card is very simple, a 4/3 for 3. So pretty similar to a Swoop Racer in that sense, but this card has a few advantages over a Swoop Racer. First of all, it has Mandalorian Trooper, two very relevant traits. It is heroism, so good for a cause I believe in, and it has Smuggle for 5. So all those little things maybe individually are not such a big deal, but taken together they make the difference. And Swoop Racer is already a card that sees a little bit of competitive play. So I think Knighhouse Skirmisher should be able to see play as well, and it has obviously many other advantages. It's a quite aggressive 3-drop that you can smuggle if you decide to resource it. That gives you a little bit more gas in the later stage of the game. So I think it's a decent card. I rated this a 6 out of 10. Next we got Clan Challengers. So a 5-drop with no immediate impact on the game. Ability to get overwhelmed if it's upgraded, not really a big deal. Even in a dedicated upgrade deck, I don't think it's going to be a super big deal. The rate 3 is nice, so that basically makes it to a 6/6 for 5 when it attacks. Not as good as the 7/7 that you get with Steadfast Battalion, so yeah, I think it's not great in general. I think it's mostly going to be a draft card, but there is one context in which this card I think is going to see play and constructed, and that's obviously going to be in the case of Grand Inquisitor. So the big question is, will Grand Inquisitor have enough space to jam this card into the deck? I think in terms of this card is, so obviously it has 3 attack and has a lot of health, and it has rate 3, so that's very good with Grand Inquisitor because you can play this card and tap it with Grand Inquisitor ability and attack for 6, which I think is very powerful. You can even equip it with a Fallen Lightsaber, and then it becomes like a 9 attack overwhelm unit. Pretty damn strong that it can attack right away. In that sense, it's a little bit similar to Seven Sister in the sense that it's a 3/6 that comes into play at 5. That deal 3 damage. Seven Sister, instead of dealing 6 damage to the base, is going to deal 3 damage to the base and 3 unit to a unit, and she has Saboteur as well. The big advantage of Seven Sister is that she is a Force enabler, which is a big deal in the deck because you're playing Force Throw, you're playing sometimes even Force Lightning. So I don't think it's going to replace Seven Sister. I think Seven Sister should remain the best card, unless we are in an environment where the guinquisitor have decided to give up on the force package, which is definitely possible. However, if you're playing, there's a world where you can play both, especially if you're playing like a double red Grand Inquisitor deck. So basically, I don't know if it's gonna make the cut in Grand Inquisitor, but it has potential to make the cut in this deck. So for that, I give it a 5 out of 10. Next, we got Covetous Rival, another expensive card with little to no impact on the board, immediate impact on the game. When played, deal 2 damage to a bounty. Not a very powerful effect and very situational because it requires a bounty to be played. So even in a dedicated bounty deck, I don't see this card being particularly good. If you can ambush it using Energy Conversion Lab, you can deal 2 damage twice and deal 4 damage in total on a bounty unit. Still remains very situational. So yeah, 6 drop with no real immediate impact on the game. Once again, the grid keyword very much irrelevant in my opinion. It's not a super relevant keyword. So overall, I think it's a 2 out of 10. I think it's going to remain a draft card. Then we got L337. So this card is, obviously everybody knows about Crafty Smuggler, a 2/2 for 2 that comes with a shield. She's basically a better version of that in a lot of ways. Crafty Smuggler already sees plays in pretty much every single black-yellow deck in the game. Doesn't see play in black in a yellow-white decks because of some very specific circumstances. Not great in Sabine Yellow because you want to maximize the power for a cause I believe in, and not great in hand because hand doesn't need that many 2-drops. But we know that 2/2 for 2 shield is very solid, and L337 is better than that on multiple levels. First of all, she's obviously heroism, so now you're going to be able to play quote-unquote a crafty smuggler that does not disturb for a cause I believe in. And I think that more and more we're seeing player maybe deciding to play in their aggro decks cards that are not super aggressive, that maybe don't deal as much damage. We see people starting playing R2D2, playing Bright Hope in their aggro decks, even though they don't deal as much damage, just because they are so much harder to get rid of. And L337 is definitely going to be one of those cards that comes into play that's going to be very difficult to get rid of unless you're playing a very specific blue deck that can make an opening to get rid of it. But then the card is, it's going to be a sticky unit that deals damage, put pressure early on, and that is not disturbing for a cause I believe in, which I think is very good. So obviously this card has other things that makes it superior than Crafty Smuggler on many ways. It can rescue captured units. We don't know how many captured deck or competitive they're going to be, but if they are, that's another benefit that you get from that card. And finally, it smuggles, and it smuggles for a really reasonable price. For it, it's definitely something that you can do. When you run out of gas, you can play additional threats, or simply if you are running in someone who's captured, you need to be plays like only one capture effect in the entire deck, or maybe 2. Then you don't have to be holding that card into your hand for that very specific situation. You can just resource the card, and then you can pay for the smuggle cost later on in the game to free that unit, which I think is very good. So overall, I rated this card at 8 out of 10. Maybe it's a bit generous, maybe a 7. It's really hanging between 8 and 7, but it's a very solid card. Next, we got Maklunki. No idea what it represents in terms of from a thematic standpoint, but it is some sort of trick. It is literally a trick that you can pick up from Jabba the Hutt, and basically you return a friendly non-leader Underworld unit, and you deal 3 damage. I think it's the first card that synergizes with Underworld, and the idea it's a little bit similar to Pirated Starfighter in a sense that it's a card that allows you to bounce your own unit, and basically Pirated Starfighter, there's a few people who play it. I think mostly people like it because of the synergy with sneak attack. You can sneak attack a unit, attack with that unit, play the Starfighter, get the unit back into your hand, like stuff like this. But it hasn't really proven to be particularly good. I think the problem is that bouncing your own unit is such a huge tempo loss that most likely it's not worth it. So let's say if you play this card like on a Greedo, like on the illustration, this basically is a 2 resources deal 3 damage to a unit, but it's conditional. You need to have a unit in play the card and deal 3 damage, and then replay the unit, I guess. So yeah, I don't think it's going to be very good unless there's very specific synergies we see, like zero unit underworld unit, zero resource underworld unit, or underworld unit with very powerful entering battlefield effect, that kind of thing. But outside of this, I don't see this card being particularly strong. I rated the 4 out of 10 just to give it the benefit of the doubt, but I'm not super confident this card is going to be very usable. But we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes. It really depends on the other synergy. It's a very synergy-based card. It's not a card that is good or bad. It's a card that is very difficult to rate on a vacuum. It's really going to depend on a lot of things. Then there is the card which is the last card of this video, and the card that is by far, in my opinion, the most exciting card that I've seen, and that is Tech. And this card is simply so great. It basically gives you a 2/5 that gives smuggles to all of your cards. All of your cards basically get smuggles, and their smuggle cost is basically their cost plus 2. And it can also smuggle itself. So this card is basically infinite value. Like, once this card is in play, you can, as long as it's in play, you're never ever running out of gas, which is kind of cool. So the way I kind of translate this card is, it's kind of like it's a 2/5 for 3 that basically you can pay 2 to draw a card. But it is better than drawing a card because it allows you to grab one of the, you don't simply just get any card from the top of the deck. You can simply play any card that you've resourced previously, so you get a lot of options of stuff that you can do. The fact that it smuggles itself is also very cool because then you can smuggle it. It's a very low opportunity cost. It's one of the lowest opportunity costs in the game because all you gotta do is resource that card, and then just having this card in your resource pile means you're never running out of gas. You're always gonna have something to play, and that can be very beneficial in very grindy matchups. So, with all that being said, as much as I want this card to be good, something that we've seen over and over again in Star Wars Unlimited is that trading tempo for value is never a good thing. Is almost never a good thing. If you look at all the cards that trade tempo for card advantage, those cards never cease play. So talking about cards like the draw 2 for 3, I don't even, it sees so little play, I don't even remember the name. Cards like a card like Cassian that basically you spend resources to draw cards. All the cards that allows you to draw to basically don't see play. The card that do card advantage and see play are cards that have that basically have an impact on the board. So whether it's a Vader or a Ewing reinforcement or a Super Laser Blast, those cards give you card advantage, but this is because they are impacting the board. But simply cards that just allows you to draw a bunch of cards, those cards are very niche. You see sometimes some people play Force Surrender and stuff like this, but those cards are very niche at the end of the day. So if Tech was simply just implementing like this in the game, I don't think he would see a lot of play, because it turns out that trading tempo for card advantage is not super amazing in the game. With that being said, Tech has one big advantage over those other cards. Like, those other cards just kind of stick in your hand when you don't have the time to play them, while Tech can simply just be smuggled, and it's only later on in the game where really people have run out of gas, then you can kind of put his engine on. And I think that's a strong advantage. Also, a 2/5 stat line for 3 is not that bad. It's actually pretty decent. So there's a couple of things going on. It's a very hard card to rate. So if I think this card was implemented in the current meta, with the current card pool that we have, I think it would see play maybe in Han Solo, as a way to kind of like, because Han Solo run out of cards very quickly. Han Solo allows you to trade, do the opposite, is gain tempo in exchange of cards, and Tech, having like a couple of Techs in your deck means you cannot run out of gas. So maybe this would be a sideboard card in some mid-range deck to fight against super hard control, maybe. I can also see in the future, so that's basically how this card would impact the meta now. So it would be a very niche card, I think. But what I want to say, and the reason why I'm going to give this card a high rating, is because I think this card has tremendous potential in the future. First thing I want to mention is a white control deck. If right now most of the control deck we've seen are going to be have been black blue or black green, either black, blue, green, or black, blue, red, or black, green, blue. Those have been kind of the most popular control color combinations. So far white has not really been a control color. But if white ever becomes a control color, this can be a very powerful late game tool for that kind of decks. Like the ability to have this as a tool of inevitability in super late game, this could be like a very, very impactful. I could even see this being played like out of aspect in black decks. But like you paid for 6, because if you reach that zone of the game where everybody's kind of out of gas, you can replay like, yeah, I think I think this could have potential. I think this could, in super late game as a tool of inevitability for a control deck, I think this card has potential. Another really strong potential for this card is obviously in combo decks. If you find a deck that is capable of producing infinite resources, tech is you play tech and then you vomit your entire resource row. Yeah, you can basically you play your entire deck, because whenever you play a card for smuggle cost, it gets replaced by the card from the top of the deck. So if you manage to basically play to get like infinite resources, you can basically play your entire deck on the board, which is kind of cool. So there is that potential as well. I don't know if there's ever going to be a way to generate infinite resources, but I have to say, very few card games have been able to avoid that possibility as time went on. So the potential is there for this card to be an insane combo engine for those decks. Last but not least, there's obviously the obvious synergy with resupply. So, and any kind of ramp decks, even like Command, for example, is you play resupply for 3, then you can smug it for 5, and you can play it over and over and over and over and over again in order to get more and more resources. And the more resources you have, the more smuggle you can do, and stuff like this. So the fact that you can replay like the card over and over again is kind of cool. Obviously, you can make an end to all this simply by killing the dude, but he's a 2/5, so not that easy to kill. Anyway, final rating for this card, 8 out of 10. I'm really excited to see what kind of decks or what kind of thing is going to emerge from this. Is by far the card I think has been the most exciting from what we've seen. And we'll see how it goes. Thank you so much for following this this long video where I try to review all the cards that have been spoiled lately. Obviously, all this is first impression, so I've not played with any of those cards. I have no idea. So my impression on this is obviously very early impression. It's just to give you a feel on how I kind of think about those cards even before playing with them. And I hope, if you disagree with anything I've said, or if I missed anything on the card that we reviewed, please let me know in the comments below. And if you like the content, as usual, like and subscribe. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.